My name is Alexander Stubb. Let's start again. So, boom, here we go.
Over the last 30 years, the forces of autocracy
The Russian army is committing barbaric actions.
My name is Alexander Stubb. I'm the director of the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute here in Florence. I'm also the former Prime Minister, Finance Minister and Foreign Minister of Finland. And what we're providing you with now is a mini lecture series of what is going on with the war in Ukraine. And we start this mini series on the 24th of March, exactly 4 weeks into the actual war. We will have 4 episodes. The first one is general. The second one is about Finland. The third one is about Europe. And the fourth one is about the new world order. And much like anyone, we're trying to make sense of what is going on, why it is happening, and where is all of this going. So today's lecture is on the general situation of the war. I will give you a short introduction, 3 points, and a conclusion. The short introduction is very simple. You know, we human beings have a tendency to do 3 things. First, we over-rationalize the past. So we look for different types of examples from the past and try to juxtapose them to today. Second, we over-dramatize the present. Now, I might add, the situation right now is dramatic, but quite often we are not in war, but we think that we are. Number 3, when we over-rationalize the past, over-dramatize the present, we end up underestimating the future. And what I think is very important today is to understand that there will be a day of peace and there will be a future, and we need to talk about that as well. But before we get there, I would like to pose 3 questions. The first one is, how did we get here? The second one is, what is Putin's thinking? And the third one is, where are we going to go now? So let's begin by thinking a little bit about how we got here. There's a lot of talk about, well, was the West a little bit too naive? Didn't we understand what happened after the Cold War? Why weren't we listening to the signals coming from Vladimir Putin for a long time, even ever since the Munich Security Conference in 2007? I always say that it's quite easy to be wise with hindsight, in other words, over-rationalize the past. And sure, let's do that. So there were 2 warning signs that we should have taken along before the third one hit. The first one was the war in Georgia in 2008. Actually started on the 8th of August, so we call it 08/08/08. I had the fortune or unfortune to be the foreign minister of Finland at the time and the chairman of the OSCE, which meant that I flew in together with the then French foreign minister Bernard Kouchner and mediated peace in Georgia. In 5 days, we were able to set up a ceasefire agreement with 6 points, which was then subsequently approved by then President Medvedev and Prime Minister Putin and President Saakashvili of Georgia. The end state of that were 2 frozen conflicts, one in Abkhazia and the other one in South Ossetia. And the situation hasn't fundamentally changed since. It was the first time that Russia came back, defined spheres of interest, encroached on the territorial sovereignty of a country and was to use weapons to do it. The alarm bells were ringing, but perhaps not hard enough, certainly not because Lehman Brothers happened about a month after that. The second alarm bells came in 2014. I happened to have been Prime Minister of Finland at the time, or a little bit after at least, and that was the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, which of course was another masterclass portrayal of Russian military strategy. And let me say how I see the playbook often going. And we thought this was going to happen with Ukraine, the annexation of Ukraine or war in Ukraine as well. First, there's a movement of troops. Second, there are exercises around the region that might be attacked. Third, there's disinformation about the activities of the other side. Fourth, there's an aim to trying to get the other side to react and act first. Fifth, when that doesn't happen, you recognize the regions, so Abkhazia, South Ossetia, or in Ukraine, Luhansk and Donetsk. And once you have done that, you send in your peacekeeping troops. This is what we thought that the playbook was for Putin, also with Ukraine now in 2022. But with hindsight, it wasn't. Yes, there were a lot of warning signals. We got them both from the Americans and from many other places, but none of us, or not many of us, believed that Russia would attack in the morning of the 24th of February, but it did. So this is a situation that we are in at the moment, basically a full-scale war on the borders of Europe and in Europe, in a situation that we did not believe that could take place, especially since the end of the Cold War in 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Question number 2. What then is Putin's thinking in all of this? And here, I have to admit that I'm sometimes a little bit puzzled by a lot of the psychoanalysis and psychotherapy that's going on, especially in Western media by so-called pundits who are saying that the behavioral patterns of Putin have changed. Look, he's sitting at the end of a long table, or that because of COVID isolation, he has lost his marbles. I think we're basically barking under the wrong tree. I've had the opportunity to be in the room, as I say, or meet Putin a few times. Now, I've usually been a minister in a delegation with one of our presidents in Finland, or then prime minister, when the meetings have taken place. And in my mind, in those meetings, Vladimir Putin was very well prepared. He was very analytical. He was very shrewd. He was very cold. And he was very strategic. And I see no reason to believe that he will have been in any which way different with the beginning of this war. We might agree with what he's trying to do, and we certainly agree that he hasn't achieved his aim, but it doesn't make him irrational or crazy. You see, you have to understand that for Putin, this is about 3 things. Number 1, his legacy. Number 2, Russian history. And number 3, his vision about what Russia should be about. Let's dissect those. Number 1, his legacy. Putin wants to be the Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great, or the Stalin of Russia. And remember that Stalin is still seen by many Russians as a hero. The reason is very clear. In Germany, they dealt with the Nazi past. In Russia, it was never done. So Stalin was seen as a great unifier, great leader, Uncle Stalin of the state. Number 2, history. There is this narrative, which I believe in, that in Russian history and culture, there's always been this sense that the country is somehow isolated. The country is somehow attacked from all kinds of different directions, like the Mongols or the Nazis, or now, for instance, NATO. And there's also this sentiment and belief in Russian history, which isn't necessarily wrong, that Russia needs to save Europe. It happened during Napoleon, and you could say that it happened also during the Nazis. So there is this feeling that we are isolated, and as a matter of fact, we have to save and help the rest of Europe from destruction. The third point is to understand that Putin has written about his vision about Russia. And for him, it's about historic Russia, going back to the 1800s. And this means borders of those times as well, especially taking over Belarus, but Ukraine, by the way, a country which is very difficult to defend because of its plains. So for Putin, Russia is based on three things. Number one, a common language, in other words, Russian. Many Ukrainians speak that. Number two, orthodoxy or religion. Many Ukrainians are Orthodox. And number three, it is based on one leader, which of course in his case is Putin himself. So Putin's thinking is based on his legacy, a notion of Russian history, and his vision of Russia, which is very different from the discourse that we often get in Europe. Point and question number three then. Where are we now, 4 weeks into this war? I immediately say I'm not a military expert, but I can say the following things. Number one, a lot of people are talking about a possible ceasefire or a peace between Russia and Ukraine. I am an idealist, but the realist in me says it is not going to happen. So basically, realism meets idealism. Why? Because the two parties are so far apart. Ukraine does not want to become Russian. Putin wants Ukraine to become Russian. So do not expect a ceasefire in the short to medium term. Georgia was a completely different story. The stakes for Putin were low. It was easy to get a 5-point ceasefire agreement and then create two frozen conflicts. It's not going to happen in Ukraine. Putin cannot afford to lose this war. He wants and has gotten a big war, and he wants, and we'll see what happens, a big peace. Second observation, are we moving into some kind of proxy war? I don't know. Of course, there are examples from history. Finland fought a 105-day winter war with Russia from 1939 to the 13th of March, if I recall correctly, of 1940. Always a possibility. The war in Korea, another example of proxy war in the 1950s, or Afghanistan and Russia, which actually lasted for over 10 years. We simply don't know, but right now we are at a stage of guerrilla warfare. In the end game, I think there are three options here, obviously simplified, but that's what we need sometimes to try to understand the situation. Option number one is that Ukraine manages to push back the Russian military and basically Putin loses already more than he does at the moment. Possible, likely, I really don't know. Option number two, Ukraine is divided into two, an eastern part and a western part. For me, that would be a frozen conflict because it is an unacceptable state of affairs for Ukraine, and I would argue also for the West. And option number three is that Putin goes all out in this war and basically is ready to destroy, with all the instruments at his hands, all of Ukraine. That would mean, of course, conventional warfare and then escalating it in a bad case scenario to chemical warfare, and then in a horrific case scenario, which I don't believe in myself, is to use nuclear. But we cannot count any of these options out because Putin is willing to go the full mile. So having answered the question, how did we get here? 2008, 2014, 2022. What is Putin's thinking, legacy, history, vision? And where are we now? Ceasefire, proxy war, three options. I would like to conclude by the following. Number one, I find it mind-boggling that the exact aims that Putin had have been reversed 180 degrees. He wanted to Russify Ukraine, but made it European. He wanted to split the European Union, but made it united. He wanted to destroy the transatlantic partnership, but gave it new life. He wanted to put NATO into the oblivion of history, but it has found a new sense of purpose. And he wanted to keep countries like Finland and Sweden out of NATO, and eventually they will join. So from a rational perspective, he has achieved exactly the opposite of what he wanted, just in order to drive his legacy. Point number 2, I believe that in the short term, with the Putin regime, we will see a total isolation of Russia. That means that Russia will be politically, economically, financially, sports, culture, energy, transport, isolated from the world. As the former Prime Minister of a country that has 1,340 kilometers of border with Russia, I think this is a sad state of affairs. But it is a reality that we have to live with. It is the price and the cost of war that all of us have to pay. And I come back to the notion, yes, we can draw some examples from the past. Yes, the present situation is dramatic. But remember that there will be a future after this war. And if we're smart, we start planning for that future. But first, this war has to end.
Over the last 30 years, the forces of autocracy
The Russian army is committing barbaric actions.